It was the time when our school had planned a summer camp trip, which was supposed to be held at Blackwood Campground in Mount Desert, Maine. Even though I was unwilling to go there, my parents still sent me. They packed entire luggage for me, which includes food, beverages, clothing, categorized different activities, etc. My parents came to the school to see me off, which felt embarrassing to me. But after seeing some other parents as well, I felt a bit relieved. But I had the biggest luggage among all, and as I was the school nerd, so other kids started to make fun of me. The kids in our school was also divided into different groups: the rich kids, the cool kids, the geeks, the nerds, and the ones whom no one takes notice of. There was a guy amongst the cool kids, Noah, whom I had a major crush on. It was not because he was cool or something, but because he never made fun of me. And even when his friends would make fun of me, he would simply change the topic to something else to distract them from making fun of me. He never talked with me or made eye contact with me, but I had a feeling buried deep inside which said he liked me. I often used to daydream about me, but never let anyone find out about it. I used to sit on the third seat from the starting second row, and he used to sit on the last row among his friends. And sometimes during the class, I would steal a few glances of him in which he would either be sleeping or gossiping with his friends. I never once saw him focusing on the class. Every time I looked at him, my heart would start beating uncontrollably. "Wasn't there a bigger luggage for you to bring, Portia?" Miss Geller, who was one of the teachers assigned to watch over the summer camp, said to me jokingly, which made everyone present there to laugh. I felt so embarrassed that I wanted to dig my grave right there and hide inside it. But I quietly got on the bus and went there to sit on my seat. "Move it, nerd. This seat is reserved for Noah and me." As I was about to sit, a girl pushed me from behind, sat in one of the seats while putting her bag on the other. I looked at her for a few seconds, but then went ahead and sat on the only empty seat left, which was behind Miss Portia. Everyone was laughing, playing games, singing, and talking during the ride, enjoying it, while I was the only one sitting alone looking at everyone. I was feeling so out of place, which was making me feel awkward. So I took out a book that I had brought for just a time like this. We reached the camp and the activities started. During the activities, no one was ready to pair up with me except for the kids who no one cared about, and they all looked like they did not care if anyone gave a damn about them. I couldn't help but notice that Noah was behaving differently than usual. I saw him snickering when other kids was bullying, and making fun of me, which stabbed like a sharp knife in my heart. I was feeling disturbed due to his indifferent behavior during the entire camp and wanted to talk to him about it, but I wasn't able to gather enough courage for it. On the last day of summer camp, I made up my mind to talk to him no matter what. The last activity we were supposed to do was rock climbing, and I decided to talk to him before that. And it's not like I didn't talk at all. I did talk to him just briefly, and the teacher called us for our turns after that. I was the first one to go, and Noah was supposed to climb after me, but I denied because I wasn't feeling well and sat near a rock and started to watch them. When Noah had climbed more than halfway down, his rope along with safety rope suddenly broke altogether and he fell down. Those who were climbing along with him tried to help, but it was too late. Noah did not die from the fall, but he sustained many serious and permanent injuries. Everyone was trying to figure out how is that possible even after so many safety gears and precautions involved at the site. As they were taking him to the emergency, I was somehow feeling relieved. It was the last night on the camp when I saw the same girl who pushed me on the bus making out with him, which made me extremely furious and disgusted towards Noah. That was when, out of the rage, I sneakily cut all the ropes, carefully knowing that Noah's turn would be the fifth one. I did not cut it completely, instead in the way which only breaks after 4 kids' turns were passed, and I did it after the advanced safety checkups so no one would suspect me. But I thought of telling him to stop if he were to explain the situation positively to me. And when I went to talk to him, he brushed me off, saying I always disgusted him and I was never worth his time. After hearing those words from him, I felt such hatred towards him that I had never felt before. So I decided to let things be. Noah's hands and legs were badly fractured, and he also sustained some injuries on his head. His parents wanted to sue the teachers for being careless, but somehow the whole matter was cooled down. It was found out that someone had cut the ropes in advance, but because no one saw me, and there was no surveillance camera installed at the time, no one was able to find who the culprit was. The problem kids were questioned, but as I had skillfully played the role of a pitiful kid who was always bullied, no one suspected me even a bit. I still feel a bit guilty of Noah's condition, but not that much to feel remorseful for my entire life. The summer was the start of me taking a step forward to the life of crimes. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I was scrolling through my phone when I came across an article, The Mysterious Disappearance of the Manic Street Preacher's Star. I opened the article to read it. It said Ricky Edwards vanished on the 1st of February 1995 and was presumed to have committed suicide. I read the article and got curious, so I Googled his name, and then I found out about his mysterious disappearance. Ricky Edwards was a songwriter, musician, and rhythm guitarist of the alternative rock band Manic Street Preachers. He joined the band in 1989 and became the fourth member and spokesman. He had a younger sister, Rachel, and the two of them were very close. His interests were in music and literature. He often used to refer to writers and poets during interviews. His love for poetry reflected through his songwritings. Edward was suffering from severe depression and often talked about it in his interviews. He was often implementing self-harm and used to cut himself and stuff cigarettes on his arms. He said, "When I cut myself, I feel so much better. All the things that might have been annoying me suddenly seem so trivial because I'm concentrating on the pain. I'm not a person who can scream and shout, so this is my only outlet." He also had insomnia and a drinking problem. He often used to drink so that he could sleep. Edward was the first person to talk about his depression publicly and inspired his fans to do so. His fans started to follow Edwards and started to harm themselves like him, copying him, etc. Caitlin Moran has also stationed in the Times, Edwards became a cause among depressives, alcoholics, anorexics, and self-mutilators because he was the first person in the public's eyes to talk openly about these subjects, not with swagger, bravado, and a subtext of "look how tortured and cool I am," but with humility, sense, and often bleak humor. On the 15th of May 1991, when he was asked a question by NME journalist Steve Lamont about how serious he was for his art, he carved the words "for real" into his forearm with a razor blade as his response. On the 1st of February 1995, Edwards, along with Bradfield, a fellow band member, was supposed to fly to the United States for a promotional tour of the Star Preacher's album, The Holy Bible, which was released in 1994. In the morning of the 1st of February 1995, he was reported missing by his family and the search began. Edward took his wallet, car keys, and some Prozac and his passport and checked out of the hotel at 7 a.m., leaving his packed suitcase behind. After he drove to his friend's place in Cardiff, he left his passport, Prozac, and the Servert Bridge tool both received. In the following couple of weeks, he was reported to be spotted by a fan in the Newport passport office and at Newport bus station who was unaware that Edwards was missing. The night before his disappearance, he gave a book, The Novel with Cocaine, to a friend, telling her to read the introduction, which followed the details of the author staying in a mental asylum. Investigation continued, and on the 7th of February, a driver reported that he supposedly picked up Edwards from the King's Hotel and drove him around the valleys. Reportedly, the passenger had Cockney accent, which occasionally slipped into Welsh one. He got out at the Severn View service station near Oss, South Gloucestershire. Edward's Volks Cavalier received a parking ticket on the 14th of February at the Sevenview service station, but it was reported abandoned on the 17th of February. Police discovered the car's battery to be dead, along with the photos of his families that were taken before his disappearance. It looked like someone had lived in the car. It was supposed that Edward had jumped out from the Severn Bridge, a known suicide site, but many of his known people claimed that he was not the type to commit suicide. Edwards himself said in 1994, "In terms of S-word, that does not enter my mind, and it never has been done in terms of attempts, but I am stronger than that. I might be a weak person, but I can take pain." Reportedly, Edwards was spotted in Goa, India, and on the islands of Fuerteventura and Lanzarote. Apart from those, there have been other alleged sightings of Edwards as well. The investigation continued, but apart from his reported sightings, there were no other evidence to the police. The investigation received a heavy criticism, was also quoted by Simpson Price, far from satisfactory. He said that police should have taken Edwards' mental state into account when they are prioritizing his disappearance. Edwards' family was given the option to declare him legally dead from 2022, but they did not for many years. His status was missing persons until the 23rd of November 2008, when he was announced presumed dead. There were many books that were written based on Edwards' disappearance, such as Rob Jonovich's book, A Version of Reason, The Search for Richie Edwards and the Manic Street Preachers. It was published in 2009. A novel was written by Ben Myers with the name of Richard, a Novel, which was published on the 1st of October 2010. Another book published in 2019 with the consent of Edward's sister, which was written by Sarah Hawes by the name of Withdrawn Trace, Searching for the Truth About Ricky Manic. That book claimed evidences that Edwards staged his own disappearance. After reading about Edwards, I opened one of his songs, Stay Beautiful, and started listening to it. And while I was listening to the song, many questions started to rise. What really happened to him? Did Edwards really commit suicide, or was he so fed up by the fame in that industry that he wanted to live a peaceful life somewhere else? Did he really stage his disappearance? And if someone killed him and they forged all those sightings of him, what was the real reason behind his disappearance? As I was thinking all these questions with my eyes closed, I fell asleep without even noticing. I used to get bullied, and so did pretty much all of my friends. I witnessed some of it, and I couldn't believe how cruel and degrading people could be. One day, while talking to my friend Sally, who is my best friend, she brought up a boy she had made friends with in conversation. We were on holiday at the time, and I already knew this kid. He was quite pretty smart, awkward, and very clearly sad. She explained how he got bullied because of his voice and how his ex-girlfriend was spreading rumors that he was faking his condition, and that he didn't really sound like that. She wanted to know if she could let him sit with us at lunch because he usually didn't have anyone to sit with. I obviously agreed to it, not really knowing that much about him. I hadn't spoken to him a couple of times, and he seemed pretty happy about having someone to talk to. But I couldn't see any personality within him. Everything he did just seemed odd, like it wasn't really him. I know that sounds weird, but that's how I felt. His name was Samuel, an unusual name, but quite nice. He seemed like a kind person, but he still carried a weird vibe. After a while of talking to him, Sally and I got to know him better. He liked dark humor much like me, and he was really into Doctor Who. None of us really knew much about it, but we still let him talk about his interests so that he could feel more comfortable around us. He talks a lot, and I didn't even realize he had feelings for Sally until he asked me if she liked Harry Potter and what her favorite colors were. She soon realized this too, but was still getting over her ex-boyfriend. So she made it clear that she wasn't interested. But he wouldn't leave her alone. He was always next to her or somewhere nearby, and it started to get to her, and she hated it. She felt as though she couldn't be alone. So I tried to do something about it. I wanted to help, so I turned his attention from her to me. I started hanging out with him more, often listening to his terrible, unfunny jokes, to his strange interests, and to everything he said. I tried to make it seem like I wanted to be there, even though at this point I really didn't. I wanted to get away from him though, and he was beginning to tire me out emotionally with him constantly being there. He wouldn't leave me alone, and wouldn't even walk home with me and my friend Grace, despite the fact that he lives in the opposite direction. At one point, I was going through a particularly hard time and being desperate for help and someone to talk to. I turned to him. I know it was the wrong move, but desperation led me to him. He asked a video call, so I agreed. I was crying, and he tried to calm me down, eventually succeeding, and just started making his horrible jokes and talking about things I like and stuff. He actually shouldn't have known about, but I didn't think much of it at the time because I just wanted someone to make me laugh. Laughter got me through a lot of hard times, and I began to think he wasn't so bad after all. I started talking to him through video almost every day after school, and I noticed him being around even more often. Then one day, he said he needed to tell me something, which turned out to be a confession. He confessed that he had a crush on me. But I had to go because my mom wanted to watch a movie with me when I got home. I had about 10 video and voice messages from him, all of them of him apologizing because he'd apparently thought I hadn't actually left to go watch a movie, but was instead avoiding him because of what he told me. I felt horrible. I didn't mean to upset him, and he was crying. I explained that I really did go to watch a movie, and that's why I had left. Fortunately, he understood. After a while of hanging out with him, I began to get tired of him again, with him constantly being there. And now also knowing that he had a crush on me, I thought back to the situation with Sally, and began to spot the same things in our friendship. He got clingy and just damn right annoying. So I politely explained to him that I didn't want to sit with him at lunch anymore. He still insisted that I sit with him, but I declined, and just told him to go away every time he approached our table. One particular incident, though, made me lose all respect for him. He would sometimes randomly walk with me and Grace, as I mentioned before. I often stayed at our house after school, and we would watch weird videos we'd found in her recommended feed, when about an hour later we heard a knock at the door. She went to answer, thinking it was her parents, but needless to say, it wasn't. It was Samuel. I heard his voice and dropped to the floor. Hoping he hadn't seen me after a long while of silence, I proceeded to army crawl over to the door to see if he was still there. "I'm lost. I can't find my house. Can you guys help me?" he asked. Liar. How could he possibly not know where his house is? And it's not like I knew where it was either. I'd never been there. He persisted and continued to knock on Grace's door. She was hiding in the living room, and we came to the decision that we would hide in the conservatory until he went away, so that's what we did. Some time passed before Grace chose to climb onto the desk and see if it was still there. She turned to look at me and pointed in the direction that she was looking. "He's still there." He was looking directly at me. He waved at me. She whispered this couldn't be happening. This wasn't happening. We weren't trapped by him. He wasn't outside. This is all a joke or something, but Grace's face looked so scared and in a way angry. I awkwardly got my stuff and told her I was going to head out to get him the hell away from her house. She reluctantly agreed, and I left with him. I offered to walk him down to the shop and let him go from there, but he refused to let me leave. He told me he couldn't see very well and that he'd almost gotten hit by a car earlier. Complete BS. This boy had boasted many times about how good his eyesight was, so there was no way he suddenly couldn't see despite his apparent sight problems. He flawlessly led me to his house at this point. I was in an area completely unknown to me, and I began to worry how I would get home. It was already dark, and there was no way I was going to wander an area I had never been in, especially in the dark. Who knows what kind of creeps would have been hiding out there? I brought this up to him, and he assured me that his mom would drop me off, but I didn't want that. I didn't want him to know where I lived with how he was acting. I was fully convinced he would try to pull something. I suffer from symptoms of schizophrenia, and this didn't at all make it better for me. I felt unbelievably unsafe at that moment and wished that I hadn't left Grace's. Countless minutes dragged on as I sat and waited in his room, surrounded by his cats. They were the only thing keeping me from snapping. After they dropped me off at my house, I went to my mom and broke out in tears. I couldn't take it anymore. He'd gone too far this time. So my mom said she was going to report him for it, because he wasn't going to cause me this much stress and get away with it. I agreed at the time, but soon after, I asked my mom to just forget it. Maybe this would all go away. But it didn't. The next day, I told him that I wasn't allowed to talk to him anymore because my mom told me not to. But he still refused to leave me alone. I obviously got mad due to having enough of his crap and had a complete mental breakdown, saying that I was going to get Tim, my boyfriend, on him because I was done. Grace and Felicity, my other friend, tried to take me to one of their most trusted teachers. But a few other teachers, despite seeing me crying hysterically, refused to let us through, because they said that she probably wouldn't be able to help us. So we found another teacher and explained the whole situation to her. She assured me that she would speak with him and attempt to get this sorted out throughout the entirety of my geography class. I was having major anxiety, but I calmed down a bit in math. And when lunch came about, I saw Grace standing next to the door holding someone else's stuff. "What the hell is this about?" I questioned. "I don't know. He just dumped it on me and left. Now he's in the toilet," she told me. Then one of my male friends who knew about the situation, Chad, approached us and offered to take his stuff while we left. I thanked him a million times and we hurried away. We reached the hall and sat down at the table where Sally and Felicity were, and everything seemed fine until he showed up again. He seemed pretty angry, so I assumed the teacher we'd spoken to had talked to him. I began to panic, thinking that this wouldn't end well, that we were in danger. Then Rafita, another close friend, walked over to him, attempting to save me from an episode. She told him that I didn't feel good and that he should probably go. But he completely ignored her and asked me if I wanted some food. I nervously shook my head and he started saying that he was going to pass out and that he needed to sit down. Rafita calmly told him that he could go sit somewhere else because this isn't the best time. He turned to her, fury in his eyes, and yelled. Now I hid my face in my hands and felt weak, like I was going to start hyperventilating. He sat down and Rafita, having had enough of this too, grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, let's go," while dragging me away, and the others followed. He also left the hall, but luckily he didn't follow us. Then all of a sudden, the built-up stress and anger caused me to start hyperventilating and crying, because I felt like I put not only myself, but the others in danger. I didn't know what to do anymore. Then Chad came and said that he'd talk to him for me, and asked him to sit with him instead of us once again. I thanked him with all my heart, and we went back to the hall. One of my old friends, Shayla, is now transgender, and his name is Jaden, came up to us, and we told her about the entire situation. She told us that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and that he had a book in which he wrote about plans for mass homicide, and that he called it Samuelism. Then Chad returned and told me that Samuel wants to talk to me after science, and how I probably should, so after science I waited for him, and he said he hadn't realized he was causing a problem. Shut up, of course, you did. How can you be so dumb oblivious to your own actions? He then proceeded to tell me how bad his day was, and I ended up having to walk him to the office. I told Tim about it, and he said he would meet me after school on Wednesdays and sort it out if he didn't stop. I was very thankful for this. I just wanted Samuel out of my life, but he still wouldn't leave me alone. After all, that he was specifically moved next to me in English class after everything that happened on Friday. He still persisted with his little games that day. Was parents' evening at school. So I went with my mom and left my phone at home. When I got back and looked at my phone, my heart dropped. 20 messages, 20 of them within half an hour, all from Samuel. I started ranting about all of this to myself and even went into the bathroom to practice what I was going to say to him the next day. I started crying again because all of this was just too much to bear. But then I decided to do something. I decided to call him out on all of his stuff and inform them that a troubled childhood is an excuse to put someone in this situation. He actually tried to guilt trip me into forgiving him by telling me his awful childhood. And I admit that I felt bad for him because no one should have to go through that kind of pain. But to show him that he isn't the only one who has to deal with things in the past, I told him about myself halfway through me explaining that I had a lot of trouble showing and experiencing emotions as a child, and that I had a lot of violent homicidal thoughts. He interrupted me, saying that he also didn't have emotions and that he had tried to kill someone because he thought it was funny. This actually pissed me off, because not only was he interrupting me to add to his story and trying to make me feel even worse, he was trying to one-up me on my suffering. If you ask me, that is absolutely disgusting. You don't compare struggles because you only have your own experiences to go off. Don't try to make another person feel as though their problems don't matter, and that they shouldn't ask for help when their problems because they're too small. That's just wrong. I calmly told him that I let him finish his story without interruptions, and that it was only fair for him to let me finish mine. That way, too, he quickly apologized, being caught out on his crap. I told him the rest of my story, and let him realize that he really wasn't the only one who had gone through stuff in his childhood. He then began begging me for another chance at being my friend, but I declined, and decided to talk with Sally instead, ignoring the rest of his messages every day. Until that point, and even for a while after, just me feeling like I was going to die, I actually contemplated suicide for a while because I couldn't deal with his constant presence. I was afraid to leave my house because I felt like he would be there. I know this is a bit weird, but I felt that way because of the schizophrenia. My episodes began getting more frequent and severe. There were periods of time where I could not concentrate in class and actually could hear what the teacher was saying because of my auditory hallucinations. I generally felt like crap, and it got so bad that I felt like I didn't want to be here anymore. But after telling him to bugger off, I felt like a giant weight has been removed from my chest and that I could breathe my own air again. Not for long though, because he kept trying to come back into my life despite me refusing to be his friend ever again. I was still there for him, but only in absolute emergencies, and by that, I mean that only if he was on the verge of dying. I wish I could say that he left me alone since then and that I never saw him again after that, but I couldn't. Because I still see him around at school, and unfortunately, he's friends with my friend Brian. So I still have to hang out around him, which sucks. He annoys me purposely to get my attention by calling himself God and other things that suggest he thinks way too highly of himself. Anyway, that's about it for my story. Samuel, please shut up about your godly status for a second and realize that the reason people hate you is because you do this not once, not twice, but always.
So pause, think, and stop so that you don't mount any more brains.